Oh, so nice. So, man, it's great to see you guys. So yeah, Spectacle, an exhibition that opened what, the end of February, 1st of March, and then was immediately shut down. So, it's been up this entire time. And so now we're in August now. The show is about to open again to be the first show of our fall season. And I wasn't exactly sure what to do over the summer. And then, when April comes around and sports national leagues start to get shut down and all over the world, soccer leagues, basketball leagues, baseball leagues, the absence of sport really kind of changed the way I started to think about this exhibition. So I really wanted to keep it up for the fall and have it represented in a different context of not as much as the original intent, but to kind of revisit it, right, with the lack of sport. So the original intent, I just want to briefly read some of the curator statement, what I put together. It's an exhibition that combines basketball and visual culture. It's a 3-person show that features the work of Brandon Donahue. Raise your hand, Brandon. Oh, look, your names are there. Y'all can read. All right, Vesna Pavlović and Chris Boyd Taylor. Also joined by Brandon Vogel, who wrote our wonderful essay for the exhibition. So I wanted to include him on this conversation as well. So the idea of the exhibition, I was playing around with the idea that centered around basketball for a few years. And this exhibition was purposely scheduled for late February and early March to coincide with March Madness, right? With the distinctly American phenomena surrounding collegiate basketball. And as we are inundated with capitalist-driven basketball-related imagery during the month of March in the United States, I didn't want to travel down the same cliched kind of path, but I wanted to focus on how visual identity of sport permeates itself into the visual language that artists use to communicate bigger ideas, ideas akin to power, voyeurism, architecture, and economic struggle, ideas of being a spectator and being spectated, kind of like the living in the shadows versus living in the light, right? The exhibition is a mix of mediums and voices that have a common thread of the sport of basketball. March 6th, I think, was the last time I was on campus. And March 13th is when we officially closed campus due to COVID-19, the global pandemic that hit the U.S. pretty hard. So everything seemed to shut down. So the intent of talking about the capitalist-driven basketball-related imagery, March Madness was canceled, right? That was one of the first major tournaments and major sporting events that was canceled. And so now looking back at it, I want to talk about how life is like now without sport or without spectator, now that sport's starting to trickle its way back into our culture. But before I do that, I want to have each of you briefly discuss the works that are currently part of the exhibition Spectacle. And Vesna, I'll start with you.
So I, thank you for organizing. It's nice to see everyone, and thank you for extending the show. I think it would be nice for new audiences to see it, and to also maybe audiences to hear us even beyond just the site of the gallery via Zoom and online. So I, in the Spectacle exhibition, I participate with the Watching Project, which is a series of black and white portraits of people watching basketball. And this is the project that I have done in collaboration with the writer, Vladimir Tupanjac, who a true basketball fan. So we both sort of produced this project as basketball fans. And it was produced between 2002 and 2005 in various locations from Belgrade, Serbia to Sacramento, California, to Athens, Greece, and Belgrade, where we sort of photographed people watching basketball to discuss the relationship between audience members and the players and what that relationship means. But it is also the project that takes on basketball and spectatorship and watching of basketball to discuss the sport itself as one of this biggest kind of emanation of power and capitalism in the current world. So I was reading the statement we wrote about it 18 years ago, and it's interesting that it still holds. Obviously the portraits. How much can we really know about what these people are watching by looking at the other side of the event, which is not the game itself, but the spectatorship or the member of the audience, is sort of also a part of the project that explores this relationship or the axis of portraiture in photography, and sort of how you want to be seen and who's looking who, and so on. One of the things that for me today, the project really becomes kind of gains almost like an additional referential point because of the current circumstances in which the audience became this artificial representation of the member of the audience, right? And the way we can talk a little more about that, just what that spectacle of sport has become now, and how the technology is actually supporting or adding this additional element to watching, and sound plays a big role, and obviously the technology plays a big role. And so I read an article in New York Times recently that really talks about this simulacrum experience and brings in Jean Baudrillard, the French philosopher and theorist, in which he really sort of talks about this simulated experience is becoming even more real than the real thing. So the watching project has always tried to talk about issues that are larger than sport, from patriotism to spectacle, through these different social circumstances, and especially now when it comes almost like a conduit for social justice. So I think it's an interesting, almost like thinking about that project now in the light of current circumstances adds an additional layer for me. I was thinking how I would, do it now if I wanted to do it now. And I have some ideas. But anyway, it's good for the beginning for me.
Yeah, I'm going to hit back on that later. You talked about adding spectators, and I'm going to talk about that because now that we're artificially adding spectators to sporting events. So, but I want to talk about Brandon with your foul shot series. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what you're thinking with the creation of those?
Yeah. So once again, so thank you for organizing the show and extending it this long, because I think the work is more impactful, throughout this pandemic. It just amplifies our messages about art and sport. So I recently relocated to the DMV / Baltimore area. And so a little history about me: I'm an airbrush artist. I began airbrushing when I was about 15 and 16. So my work has a lot to do with like customization, commemoration, and also just working on like t-shirts and fabrics and, cars, automotives. So when I thought about like this show, I thought about the history of basketball. And I recently found out that like the father of Black basketball, which is Dr. E.B. Henderson, it was located like 10 minutes away from my home in Mount Rainier, Maryland. And Mount Rainier is like 10 minutes from DC. So I was kind of fascinated with learning about like who he was and how he contributed to the game of basketball. He learned from Dr. Naismith about the game of basketball at Harvard, which he brought back to Washington, DC. And then from DC, it spread along the East Coast. So I was just like, wow, like what am I going to do with all this information about? Because obviously today it's, predominantly African-American sport, professionally. So so I took the structure of a t-shirt and the structure of a basketball jersey, and I did like a portrait of him as a young man and as an old man, combined with these like toilet seats, which kind of alludes to like this idea of like low art. And I elevate these like these toilet seats up. So there's a t-shirt with a toilet seat connected to it, which is sort of in a, for lack of better words, primitive, like old basketball peach basket kind of way. It's not a modern hoop, but it still works. It still functions as a basketball goal. And so, yeah, I just wanted to approach that like sport in that way, and also give a nod to Dr. E.B. Henderson for providing that opportunity. Also, he did it during segregation. So that was even like, it was a tougher task of bringing that sport to, to the African-American community. So I think the show has, I have 3 or 4 different hoops that are airbrushed and collaged with like these toilet seats. So.
Yeah, and the way they're hanging, they're not 10 feet in the air like a standard basketball goal, height of a basketball goal, but they're down low, eye level, which makes these pieces, makes the idea of putting the ball in the basket a lot more accessible. And so, yeah, thank you for that, Brandon.
Christopher, tell us about your arena.
Yeah, so back in, I guess it's 2015, 16, I got a traveling grant to be able to kind of do some trips around the southeastern United States, looking at kind of venues of spectatorship is what I was coining the term, but theaters, stadiums, arenas, churches, and I kind of I was trying to bite off more than I could chew, and ended up finding that the most accessible of those pieces of architecture were definitely kind of the sports arenas and stadiums, where churches were closed other than pretty much nighttime or Sundays. So quickly ended up kind of focusing on the architecture of sport that surrounds the game, and kind of just mining for visual information, mining for conceptual information. And I started to see a common thread, especially at racetracks, where they would paint the bleachers kind of a speckled pattern. And you'll see this at the Superdome in New Orleans. That was the first place I saw it, but then I saw it at all these racetracks, and I came to find out that was a pattern that they used to mimic spectators in the stands. It was kind of a visual trick. So maybe you had a quarter-filled stadium or arena that would actually, from a TV view, would look like it was actually full. It functions pretty well. So I like that little gimmick that they use, to that little visual trickery. And I like how it's kind of a proxy for the spectator. And I'm totally into patterns and in my work, and kind of bright colors. And that really just kind of gelled with something that I already use in my work. So ended up making a bleacher set that used that pattern. And Michael and Vesna saw that piece at a conference. There was an exhibition tied to the conference, CCAT conference. And originally the idea was to just continue that same bleacher set and turn it into a sort of stadium. But I ended up wanting to really just kind of construct a new piece for the space that used that pattern, but also used something that's unique to basketball arenas, is a real high tilt in the bleachers, that almost if you've ever been to the nosebleeds of a basketball arena, especially old basketball arenas, it feels like you're stepping twice as high up as you are out, right? It's very, very steep. And I always get scared when I'm up there, you know, it's like, whoa, you're really on top of each other. But I like that idea of the spectators really kind of being almost on top of you in that scenery, in that scene. And so that's kind of the visual information that I was trying to pack into the piece. There's the obvious kind of wooden roller coaster, repetitive structure that's just, it kind of, it's pretty stimulating to just walk around that and through that. I remember doing that as a kid, walking under wooden bleachers and kind of looking at all the X's and how they would just kind of play off each other, almost a rhythm. I also wanted the feeling that when the viewer walked in, that they felt that they were actually, maybe you'd shrunk a little bit, that you were actually in this stadium. So the arena is actually raised. And so you're kind of at that level where you might be a basketball player, or maybe you're in the first rows of the stadium. But also when you walk around the arena, you can kind of peer through it. And that's that same kind of visual experience that you have when you walk into a basketball arena. Many basketball arenas are actually underground, right? So you walk in and you're actually kind of halfway. And so you peer down onto the golden basketball court, right? So trying to kind of give a layered experience there in creating this piece of architecture that to me is kind of a symbolism of our, going back to this idea of being interested in churches as venues of spectatorship. It's in our 2000s society has almost replaced that adoration and communal tribal unity behind our team. And now we kind of back our sports team with our flags and our colors and our chants, award chants, right? There's a lot of similarities there, but I think that architecture, just like a church, is kind of a symbolism of this importance that we place on that edifice.
Right. Yeah. I was having this conversation recently about that same idea, is about how sport has somehow, and in some ways has replaced religion. And, especially in, as we live in the South, right? Football is the religion. That's Sunday afternoon religion versus Sunday morning religion. But also too, it's that sense of, it negates almost like politics or socioeconomic, it bridges those gaps when we all come together collectively to cheer for one common goal, right? So I'm kind of curious, as far as Brandon Vogel, your thoughts on this idea that when we do come together collectively as a community, a state, a region to cheer for a certain team, as we come together and put everything else aside and hope that our team wins, now that we, in a moment that we don't have that, that we don't have that common cause to cheer for, I kind of start harking back to, like, it seems that we're also even more pitted because that takes away a common goal. I want to hear some of your thoughts about that, maybe.
Yeah, it's been an interesting time not having that part of it. It was too uncertain to have sports, and I think if you really boil things down to their most basic level, like, the appeal of sports is that they are certain and they are concrete. Like, the Sacramento Kings and New Orleans Pelicans play, and the only thing that is designed to do is to determine which team wins that day. And, part of what I wrote about in the the essay for this exhibition was, as someone who lives in that sports world full time, who is, you know, the people chronicling those day to day, every minute happening you can think of. And like a large part of my job is covering college football, where there's no detail that does not merit its own coverage. Is exhibitions like this and people kind of stepping outside of the day to day of the sports world, of the result is the only thing that matters here, is what I have really come to prize. And kind of collectively, all of these works really afforded me the opportunity to do, which I appreciate. It's kind of become the only thing I want, being so focused on the other thing all of the time, is to be able to say that, you know, I guess sports, due to their popularity and their place in culture, is almost by definition kind of a populist pursuit. It is not often assigned intellectuality. It's not something that is seriously considered at a high level a lot of the time. But all of these works did that for me. And it said, you know, it says that, hey, there's something here. There's more here than just what you see on the court. And yes, it's good to get back to that. It's good to have kind of the reprieve of, hey, basketball's back and I'm going to watch this, and either the Miami Heat or the Boston Celtics are going to win, and that's going to be end of story. And we will know for sure at the end of these 48 minutes. And that's nice too. That has its place. I think that's, like I said, kind of one of sports' primary benefits. It's concrete, it's defined, and it is what it is. In a more normal circumstance, you can become bogged down by that. And I think that's what this exhibition sort of asks us to step outside of and say, what's the cultural impact here? And since we've been without sort of the more day-to-day part of it, you know, it's been easy to like, well, let's just get that part back, and then we can get back to considering some of the bigger ideas here. But it won't be long before I'll get over the newness of being able to watch basketball again, and get back to wishing, man, I wish this was a more intellectual and artistic pursuit than it often is day to day.
Yeah. Well, do you think that was part of the push to kind of reinstitute soccer and baseball and coming up on football? Is that need to kind of have that? I'm not sure if it's a distraction from the data, from our day to day, if that's the nice 48 minutes of a basketball game, the 90 minutes of a soccer game, right? The 3+ hours of whatever baseball and football give us, you know. Or do you think that was some of the push to kind of have the seek of normalcy in what we have right now?
Well, that and the massive amounts of revenue.
Well, that was my next part. Yeah.
Sorry to be so cynical. That's kind of by nature. But no, I think that is part of the discussion, you know. And so when this happened, like canceling the NCAA tournament is a huge deal. That's a like $6 billion enterprise when you talk about everyone involved. And for that to go away kind of as quickly as it did, right as this was, you know, right as we were getting scheduled to have this discussion for real and in person, it was massive. And so there's always that part of it, but we had so much time for me as a kind of leader of an editorial outlet to look back. And you know, you can go back to kind of the pandemic of 1918, or you can go back to, particularly for college football, World War II was a big time when a lot of football programs that would have been considered major at the time went away. And, you know, a lot of the ones that chose to play or were able to, like, kind of national morale was a big part of that. So I don't think you can remove that totally from the discussion at all.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I was thinking about was your, and I've had these kind of thoughts about the tribal nature of our fanaticism towards sports, right? and we kind of take on these colors. You see it pretty strongly in like a World Cup setting, right? Where countries are united regardless of political biases. They're united with their flag against other countries, right? They're kind of going, it's this kind of proxy for war, right? We're going to go against these other countries, and we're going to, we're known for this. We're going to beat this country, and then we have these bragging rights over that country, right? And that kind of fills a human need that has always existed to be part of something. And I think you touched on an interesting point that I hadn't thought of. Sports were removed, and we're all getting after each other, right? Whether it's politics, whether it's racial tensions that have always existed but really kind of come to the forefront. Those, like, those maybe sports that we really do, I've kind of been a little bit, I love sports, but I've always questioned, why do I need sports, right? And now I'm like, oh, maybe there is a real need there, a real need for us to kind of
tribalize or something like that. Like, it's like tribal. It's very tribal.
Go ahead, Brandon. Yeah.
No, I just want to say the word tribal. Like, I think about tribes and how we like associate with tribes, and that's what teams are. That's what, to me, it's like, like competitive nature relates to tribal nature. That's all I wanted to insert. You can finish. That's all I want to say.
No, I mean, that's kind of all I had, but I thought Michael kind of touched on an interesting correlation there, right? I also think it had something to do with us all being cooped up in our houses, with a crazy 3-year-old and preteen. But
right. Vesna had mentioned something earlier about the role of the spectator and adding spectators, especially for me when watching these games, was the addition of spectators, but not the addition of spectators for the player's point of view, but for TV production of that sporting event. And the role of, well, I know baseball has added their cardboard cutouts in the stands, so that was one of their solutions. But I also watched a little bit of a baseball game where the outfield was completely filled with animated characters that were super like a EA video game. And I don't know, is that the seek for the person seeking for the spectator at home to feel like it's more of a real game, or they feel like they can put themselves in that, they can envision themselves in that stand, versus the obviously the empty stadium, right? Is to the acknowledgement of like, oh wow, that is an empty stadium, they're playing in front of no one. So
I wonder if the games, like say basketball games and other sports, do they actually get the artificial sound in the games?
Well, I think the artificial sound has been piped in for the viewership, right? Because
I wonder if it is piped in for the players, for the game itself.
I'm not sure. I know the soccer games that I've been watching, either English Premier League or MLS. I have a Roku, so I have the like Fox Sports channels. Mm-hmm. I can choose to watch it with simulated sound, or I can choose it with natural sound.
Right.
And I'm fascinated with the natural sound.
Yeah.
Because I think part of me know that the sound is artificial. Mm-hmm. And so I was watching a game last night, and the crowd started chanting their hometown chant. I'm like, but they're not even playing in their hometown right now. So like, who decides? The audio guy decides that we're going to play that hometown's chant now, and the boos and the referee.
It's like a whole new enterprise to think about the soundboard and to think about what kind of sounds. Or I know that the soccer league in Europe has been working with the electronic games, actually like borrowing the sound from the games themselves. And I think that in that article that I mentioned, it's interesting to think that CBS, a network like 20 years ago, was criticized because they pushed some avian sound, like some bird chirping sounds in the PGA tournament, but they were not native to the to the area. So who gets to decide what's native anymore? But I think that, for me, it's like really interesting to think that the spectator has finally reached the moment, the audience, where, that they are now also being watched on TV. So it's not that they're watching the game in the AI setting, but we are watching them watch the game at home. So there's yet this another layer. And I think that this ultimate, this desire of the spectator to be seen, it's almost like the spectacle has been like totally rounded up almost. It's not the game itself in any sport, but it's the artificial spectator that is also being watched on an additional layer, on a different device or in a different. So it seems that technology all of a sudden started to play a large role in how we understand and enjoy sport. Do we, and I haven't been looking enough to notice that, but, I was reading about the camera close-up. Are the players seen more close up, which sort of made me think about Zidane in that film, 21st Century Portrait, the way how technology really in the Douglas Gordon and Philippa Pereno, how, we see that one player for entire 90 minutes of the game, of the match, how technology really plays the role in facilitating the viewing experience. But now it almost like is facilitating on yet an additional layer.
Right. Yeah, because I know when I was watching English Premier League, they actually set up jumbotrons at the ends, on the edges of the stadium. So they had fans that would submit videos or have a camera in them in their house watching the game, and then they would project those so the players would know that there are fans watching.
See, they stole my idea.
Right. And then, but MLS didn't do jumbotrons. It's artificially put into the screen. So if you look at one camera angle, they're playing at what almost looks like a high school field. And on the other camera, when it switches angles, there's ads everywhere. There's people with jumbotrons that are all artificial. But that is really geared towards the TV viewer of the game. So I don't know, it almost, there's such a great, an attempt to make the people at home feel like there's other people watching the game at the same time. I don't know, this desire to be connected as a group in a sense. And it kind of goes back to what, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't want to take too much time, but I thought that would be a fascinating program for any athletic program. And I was thinking of actually suggesting that to Vanderbilt, organizing maybe nobody's partying anymore, but let's bring the people from their homes into the jumbotrons. Let's bring the viewers straight to the game, but in real time. So it's not like just some kind of a representation, but of the viewer, but it's actually a viewing experience as can be really personal or collective.
Right.
So.
Right.
I want to add something about that too. So this makes me think about the esport industry. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the esport industry, but it's like a multi-million-dollar industry of having an NBA 2K tournament where you could kind of compete against someone playing a video game. And watching the new NBA, which I've only seen one game, but it just kind of reminds me of there's no physical audience, but there's the players, which somehow I'm imagining that I can control, which is not good. There's a video game aspect to it, and it just reminded me of esports. And I think we're kind of leaning more towards what we are accustomed to with the esports or with like video games. So
yeah, the same way that Major League Baseball was putting the esports kind of fan base, right? You see that one fan in the one virtual fan in the crowd, and they're just doing this one motion over and over and over again forever. But collectively, it looks like a cheering crowd, right? Yeah, and then using esports, which is a simulation of real sports, using that simulation to simulate the real sports coming back.
yeah, just blew my yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of the contemporary version of like kind of what Christopher was saying before it was coloring bleachers, right? I had a conversation with a class that came in to the gallery when it first opened, and talking about the coloring of the bleachers. And we live close to Nashville, so we have Nissan Stadium, which is all blue seats. And when there's half a crowd in Nissan Stadium, it, especially on TV, when it's an empty stadium. And versus, kind of like the Superdome, you have to work at it a little bit to see the lack of crowd, right? Which is a complete design aesthetic, right? To trick the spectator. And now we've gone way beyond, like, this is like the 8-bit graphic version to esports. Does anyone else have any comments on
that? I had a little comment. I follow some UFC MMA type sports, and they were really kind of hell-bent on being the first to start sports again, and they created a fight island. They did some fights in Florida. They did some fights in at their headquarters in Las Vegas. But to me, it was a very pure version of the sport, right? It kind of distilled away all of the frosting, and we were just looking at the game itself, right? You had pretty much all the necessary components, only the necessary components to make that game happen, as well as have an audience. You also had 3 announcers around the octagon. And one of the funny things that happened in that really kind of intimate situation was the fighters could actually hear the commentators, right? And so the fighters were hearing between rounds, hey, this guy needs to do this. He needs to change his techniques. And there were times when they were actually following what the commentators were suggesting that they did.
Oh, wow.
So, but I was impressed. For the guy that puts all the colors up to kind of be that proxy, I really enjoy, I enjoy high school sports that aren't super well attended. Like maybe it's just parents that go to a tennis match or a wrestling match or, a less popular sport. Because those players there, and basketball is the same way when you get to a neighborhood level or a rec league level, those players and that game is being taken place because people just love to be there, right? There's this honesty about that sport where there's big dreams, but people aren't getting paid, right? It's just there because people enjoy it. It's the same thing. I saw some kids playing basketball in my neighborhood today, and it was like, there's a purity of that where it's about the markings within the court, right? It's about the rules of the game. It's about that competitive drive. And there's something nice and, to me, pure about just watching those 2 guys play a pickup game, right? Mm-hmm. That I was able to appreciate for a brief moment, even though there's more layers to the MMA world, but just that idea of, hey, we got 2 guys in a ring. There's nothing else going on. Let's see what happens.
Right. Yeah, and something you tapped into about the honesty of the game, right? And so I've been, and I keep going back to MLS and English Premier League because that's been my distraction. Is I'm really in tune, we talked about sound earlier, is having the natural sound, the non-simulated sound. Because of that honesty, right? I can hear what the coach is yelling. I can hear the players talk to each other, and it's more about the game. And when that simulated sound is there, or even at a game when the crowd is there in person, sometimes I drift off, and then I can tell when to look when I hear the level of the crowd go up, right? Like something's about to happen. Let me watch. Oh, there it is. And I'm cheering with them. But now I'm actually paying attention to the actual nuance of the game itself, and finding a different type of appreciation for, you know, the sport itself. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I did want to mention like that the exhibition itself was intentionally to not have any sound, right? I was thinking, I was playing around with the idea of piping in simulated sound, right? And as an aesthetic approach, and now it's like a reality that I watch on TV just a couple months later of how it's needed to direct the narrative, right? You know, when the crowd boos, I'm like, well, apparently they didn't like the ref's call, but it's just one guy and a button that is summoning the masses to boo in his favor. But
I would argue, Michael, that there's a lot of sound in the exhibition, but also, you know, like if you step into that arena that Chris has made, like, or, you know, or you stand underneath the hoop, or you're looking at people, you know. So I think that there's you know, the silence that you're stepping in is very loud, you know, visually.
right.
So that I think, I would argue that there is not a lack of sound. I think the audiences there who step in there already have that sound in them, because we have been hearing and appreciating sports all our lives, and it's omnipresent. We can't really escape it, and especially now, as you're saying, it's a kind of like a collegial college kind of environment, and so on. So I think that what I find interesting right now, you know, is that relationship between sound and both artificial and natural that you're talking about, and something that we used to kind of exert as our reaction. At least watching deals with a lot of reaction and a lot of belief in the impossible when you're looking and when you're watching. So a lot of the times when we are at the game, I think it's our, you know, it's a belief in victory, but it's a belief in the impossible. That's why it's a temple. That's why it's religious. That's why it's tribal. Also, like, I think that there's this almost like ritualistic aspect, like if I do this way, then we will win, or, you know, like how many times have we done that? So you know, like there's that layer to enjoying sports which transcends just the event itself. It kind of comes or goes to the layer of belief in the impossible.
Right. Yeah, and that's, you know, what I was getting with the sound. Yeah, it was a choice not to direct the narrative, but knowing, like what you just said, and knowing that we all have our history of what an arena sounds like, or what a game sounds like, watching a game on TV, playing a video game, what that crowd sounds like. We've been to
The
high
radio,
school.
like, I mean,
Radio,
how many
yeah.
times did you turn on the radio in your car, or, you know?
Right. I mean, I've listened to full football games driving in the car, and I can picture it, right? So, and when I came, so in the gallery, I didn't want to have this forced narrative, right, to drive the sound, but to know that everyone that comes into that gallery will have that bank of audio in their head that is going to react different every single time, right? They bring their own experience. And I was talking to a class that first week, and we started talking about the sound, and then in the back, one of the students just put his hands up and was like, ah, like he had it in his head. That is exactly, we're bringing that to the exhibition. So yeah, how vital a role that sound plays in that experience. But also have an exhibition on sport and spectatorship with roaring crowds, and like you're seeing your photographs of people screaming and cheering, but there's nothing there, right? There's no audio. but we can hear that in our head, or we can fill in those gaps, which I think we can fill in the gaps of all the people sitting in Chris's stadium. I don't know how many times I walked into the gallery and just like big tomahawk dunk right on Brandon's like hoops, because I know if I did it, it would probably break it. But I just want to like sit and swing on it, and posterize somebody. So, but I'm picturing that in my head, like I'm bringing that. Well, I was gonna kind of wrap it up, and I'm gonna totally put Vogel on the spot to let you kind of maybe have some last words about like sport and art, and if there's anything you want to conclude with about this exhibition, and I'll just let you take it from there.
Yeah. So
Welcome.
as I reread the essay that I wrote, which was written before, we were aware of what was happening in places throughout the world, but the COVID-19 pandemic had not hit the U.S. at the time that I was writing that. I kind of built it around this bubble metaphor, which now I'm thinking maybe may have been the wrong choice of words, since we have all been forced to be in, literal bubbles to certain degrees. As we talk about the NBA, that's what they're calling what they're in. But I just kind of wanted to reiterate that all of these works in various ways. For somebody who, I love sports, I make my living that way, and I, even though I love my job and I love what I do, and this is I'm fortunate to be able to do what I've chosen, in a perfect world, what I would do for free. You get bogged down with it, and you get a little bit, or at least I get a little bit worn down with kind of the mundanity of it. The fact that there's so few people in the people that I interact with day to day, or just coverage of sports as a whole. And if you watch ESPN or any of the sports networks now, you see it's all about debate. It's all about kind of a cult of personality. To be able to spend some time with people who are willing to say, there's more here. And this is, yes, sports is its own thing. It can be kind of lowest common denominator if you really want to hold a dim view of it, but to be able to step outside and say, no, this is really a cultural exploration. And throughout kind of human history, sports have played such a pivotal role for people in terms of the importance. And yes, it's very easy and consistently goes over the line of, hey, is this too important? Yeah, this is starting to feel like it might be too important. Just to have it treated with sort of that care and that seriousness is really all I want, is someone who spends my every day full time in that world. So I guess more than anything, thank you guys. Thank you for not stopping the sports writer at the door when it came time to write about art. And I'm really appreciative of the opportunity, and I was appreciative to be able to spend some time with great work like this.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for being part of this exhibition, and for being here today to have these conversations. These conversations I've been having, it seems like my wife is tired of hearing these conversations I'm having with just her, so it's nice to get you all together. She's like, why don't you need to talk to them about this? So here we are, and I'm glad we could all join it.
And I'm glad that y'all were all part of this exhibition. It really does mean a lot. Spectacle runs through September 18th, 2020 in the new gallery on the campus of Austin Peay State University. For those of you who can't travel to be here, a 360-degree VR virtual walkthrough can be found in the link below. So put on your VR goggles and have a visit. All right, thank you and good night.